Hello there, welcome to my channel and welcome to the final video in my review series of the iFlytek AINOTE Air 2 device. And this is the 8-inch device, not to be confused with the 10-inch device, which will be released at some point in the near future with, unfortunately, the same name. But this is the device that was actually released last year, and I just finally got to reviewing it. Now, before we get into things, I wanted to give you a little bit of my past, and this will be relevant, as you'll see fairly shortly. So in the 90s and then in the turn of the century, I was really into soccer management games. And these were computer games where you ended up controlling a soccer club. You didn't play the games, you didn't control them like you would in an arcade game of any type of sport, but instead you would do everything else. You would be the manager of the team, you would work on the facilities, and you work on your coaching staff and all that good stuff. That time period when I was in those games was really a golden era in these types of games. And these games are coming out from multiple publishers, multiple times a year. It was just a really great time. It eventually kind of dried up and consolidated into more or less just one company that's releasing those games nowadays, although there are other people trying to release games that just aren't nearly as good. But anyway, the reason why I'm mentioning this is during that time, there was a game called Ultimate Soccer Manager. Now, I remember when I started to play the game, I didn't like it. It was quirky. I found it too cumbersome relative to other games that I'd played previously, and I just thought it wasn't anything like the other games I'd enjoyed, so I ended up just putting it on the shelf. For whatever reason, at some point, I took it off the shelf and gave it another chance. And what I found that second time around is I could find ways, the game was so adaptive, that I could find ways to kind of compartmentalize the areas that I didn't like and, play the game in the manner that I wanted to play it, which turned out to be something that I very much found engaging, and I ended up spending a lot of time playing that game. And even to this day, I have very fond memories of that game, even though we're talking like over 20 years ago when I played it last. Now, this game was never really on most people's top 5 or top 10 list of soccer management games, at least the list that I found on the internet. And I never felt like this game was the best soccer management game out there. And yet, it's a game that I think about as much as those other games that I do think are among the best. And it just sticks out in such a positive way for me. So why mention all this? Well, the way I think about the iFlytek, it reminds me of Ultimate Soccer Manager. The iFlytek is not the best device out there, and we'll talk a little bit in detail of what is. And yet, it's got enough creative and quirky ideas that I really enjoyed reviewing it, and I have a lot of positive things to say about the device. So in this video, we're going to go into a full review. We'll go into the details, starting with the battery life of the device, going into what I call my primary and secondary pros and cons, and then I'll try to bring that all together and summarize it in terms of who I think the device might be for and who might want to look elsewhere. And I'll give, in that context, my final recommendation. Actually, just before we get into the battery results, let me cover a couple things that I neglected to mention in the other previous 2 videos. We'll start with the hardware aspect. And one thing I didn't note is that while I did mention that the device mounts to the cover via hooks, what I didn't mention is that the way it is in the case is it's kind of like a spine such that the device itself is like in a page of a book. And the only reason why I mention that is it allows you easy access to the flap should you end up deciding to use that. So for example, if you put your device in the case, you're using the magnetic attachment for the stylus, and you change your mind later, getting to the flap is a really not a big deal. If you do put the stylus in the pen loop, the cover will kind of hang open slightly. Not a big deal, but just something to be aware of, I suppose. The last thing I want to say about the case is there are magnets in the case. So even though the main mounting mechanism is via hooks, there are magnets on the edge, and that allows the case to basically remain closed as you're traveling. So it's kind of a nice little feature they put here in the hardware. Also, as it relates to the stylus that comes with this device is basically just a rebranded King-Write stylus. And here's an image of the King-Write stylus as well as the stylus that comes with this device. So if you're familiar with the King-Write, you're familiar then with this stylus as well. If you're not familiar, it's a stylus I generally like. I guess the cons for the King-Write is that it is one of the thinner styli. So for people that might need a thicker one, this is a little bit on the thinner side, so that might be a concern. The King-Write has a little bit of a texture on it that I find I can kind of, my fingers slip a little bit. That's not the case with the version that comes with iFlytek. I think it's got a better grip in my opinion, but otherwise the two styluses are identical. The other thing I want to mention is that there is an app, and there it is right there. And this basically is a way to view notes. So if I'll pull it up, you can see a list of notes, and I'll go ahead and select this one at the bottom, and then you can go in and view your notes accordingly. So the app is only there to basically view notes. You can't do any type of editing in it, but it is available in either Android, as we have here, or on iOS. But it's only used if you end up creating an account. If you don't have an account, then your notes won't sync to the cloud and you won't be able to use the app. But if you do have an account, then that option is available to you. Okay, so now we're going to go into the battery results. And let me just say one thing about it before we go straight into the tables. The way I do my battery testing, and this is true of all devices, is I shut off the power saving features. And the reason why I do that is I want to basically measure the impact of different aspects of the device in isolation, and using the same manner as I would any other device. But in the practical world, when you actually start using the device, you'll get better battery life results than the table suggests if you're using these things like auto sleep and auto shut off. So it just depends on how you use the device. And in fact, all the battery life depends on how you use the device. So it's not as easy of a question to say, hey, does it have good battery life or not in most cases? Rather, the question is, it depends on how you're going to use it, and these tables kind of help give an impression of what that might be like for you. The best use of the tables are less about the numbers themselves and more about how the numbers compare to other devices, given that I test everyone on the same level playing field. So hopefully that makes sense. So given that, let's go in and see what the results are for this device. Okay, so our focus for these battery tests is comparing the iFlytek versus other devices in its class, and that ranges from 7.8 to 8.2 inches on the screen size. So those are the devices that you see on the screen. The average and median, however, include all devices I've ever tested, 25 in total at this point, and that would include other sizes like 10 inches, 13 inches, and even 7 inches. So everything's represented in the gray bars, and the 7.8 to 8.2 is in the blue and green shaded bars. I've shaded the iFlytek there in the middle of the table green just to highlight that device. And I also did the AI Paper Mini toward the bottom in the same color, since these are competing against each other in my mind. Let's start with the standby time with the screen off, and this is when the device is in a sleep mode. You might have the screensaver on the screen, and in order to be able to start engaging with the device, you press the power button, and in 1 or 2 seconds you're off to the races. So it's kind of like a readiness mode, but the screen is off, and the battery drain in this case was 0.18% per hour. That's less than some of the Big Me devices on this table, but higher than other devices, including the AI Paper Mini, although pretty close. The two devices, the iFlytek and the Viwoods, are pretty close together on this particular test. Next up is standby with the screen on. So similar to what we just covered, except the screen is active. So you don't have to press the power button. You can just grab your stylus and start writing. In this particular case, it's a 4.5% battery drain, which is pretty significant based on the other devices on this table. Actually, it's 3 times what the AI Paper Mini is. Now, it's not the worst measurement that I've ever had. There's another device that has that, but it's still really high for this particular size category. The next item is Wi-Fi drain, and this is basically the standby with the screen on, but you also have Wi-Fi on at the same time as well. Now, Wi-Fi is not actively downloading in this particular scenario. It's just on, connected to your local network in a state of ready mode. And in this particular case, the battery drain is 4.6%, another high mark relative to its peers. However, not as bad as the previous mark, because the 4.6% includes the standby time with the screen on battery drain. So the Wi-Fi is actually only adding 0.1% of battery drain. So actually what this means from practical terms is that you can just leave Wi-Fi on. The amount of drain that Wi-Fi will add is not particularly significant. Now, there's exceptions to that, and the exceptions would be if you were not on a Wi-Fi network and Wi-Fi was constantly looking for networks, that would probably drain the battery more than what we're saying here. Same if you're actively downloading, but just having Wi-Fi on while you're on a network doesn't introduce that much drain. Okay, now we're going to look at front lighting. In this case, I look at cold lighting, both full cold and half cold. I don't look at warm lighting because statistically I don't see a huge difference between cold and warm lighting in terms of battery performance, but also some devices don't have warm lighting. Every device has cold lighting. So that's why I focus on that. So if we start off with just full cold front lighting, there's 10.3% battery drain, which is really significant. It's not, again, not the worst of all devices that I've tested, but much worse than the other devices in this product category. Just a lot of drain if you crank the front lighting up all the way. If you only go half of the way, it's actually also significantly high at 8.2%, and that is the worst measurement that I've ever observed among the 25 devices. Although, to be fair, not all 25 devices I've reviewed have front lighting, but the ones that did, the AI Air 2 is the worst among those. Our last tests are going to be the more practical tests, and this is the reading test and writing test. The reading test is either Kindle or Kobo, and I'm just reading a novel and then taking measurements after at least 45 minutes. And I try to use the Kobo app if available. If it's not available, then I go to Kindle. In the case of the iFlytek, Kobo was available, and so that's what I used. And the battery drain there, a shocking 1%. It's actually the best on the table and inconsistent with all the other observations we've seen so far. Now, one question that you might ask is, well, how can you have 4.5% of drain just having the screen on when you've got reading where you're actually flipping the page and it's only draining 1%? How could that be lower than the other 4.5%? And that was certainly my thought as well. So I went back and revalidated both of the measurements, and both stood up upon further scrutiny. So the theory that I have, and it's only a theory, is that there's something else happening when the screen is on and the device is in a readiness state. There's something going on in the system in the background. One theory that I have about that is that sometimes when I've done testing and I've written a word in a notebook and then I go to search across notebooks, sometimes I don't find the word that I just wrote, and sometimes I do find it. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is what that implies to me is that the system is probably constantly or on some sort of cycle screening notebooks and other activity to help with its search functionality. In other words, there's activity that the system is doing in terms of going through your notes and converting it via OCR so that it can search on it later. And instead of trying to do that all at once, it does it over time in order to make that search more effective and not get bogged down. They can happen sometimes with competitors when you do a search and the contents had not been previously indexed. So my supposition here is that the difference between the reading and the system on but not being utilized is that background process, which I'm assuming is shut off when you're using the Kobo app. So using the Kobo app basically, in my theory, takes you away from the system function, probably pauses those functions while you're reading, and that would explain the disparity between these two numbers. Is that what's happening? I don't know. I can only speculate on that, but I do know that these readings are accurate based on my testing and retesting. Anyway, that's going to end with our continuous note-taking measurement, and this is basically where I start a writing test. I start writing furiously with absolutely no breaks for at least 10 minutes, and then I keep writing until I notice the battery indicator change again. And in this particular case, that is a 21.3% drain, which is, again, returning to our pretty significant poor showing relative to other devices in this size class, as well as other devices in general. This is somewhat of a fake test in that it's pretty rare that you would write as intensely as I do in this test, but I do it consistently across devices just to give a sense of what the drain is and how it differs between devices. So while it's doubtful that you're going to write for 5 hours in this manner and therefore drain the battery because it's at 20% per hour, still relative to other devices, you're going to drain a lot faster writing on this device than some of its competitors. So I think it's pretty clear that overall the battery life on this device just isn't as good as other devices in its size class. And that's pretty much true across the board, although not exclusively, as we saw with reading. Does that matter? It just depends on your situation and your use case. I didn't find in just using the device at work and taking notes that the battery life was a huge issue for me. But there's no question that other people do it better. And I guess that's really the ultimate takeaway. I wouldn't necessarily not buy the device just because of the battery life, but just know that if battery life is a huge area of focus, then this device would be something you probably wouldn't want to purchase. But if you have some flexibility and how you're going to use the device, then it may not be a critical issue after all. All right, having said all that, let's go ahead and jump right into the pros and cons of this device, and then we'll get to my ultimate conclusion from there. So we're going to begin with what I call the primary pros, and I think these are probably the headlining reasons why someone would want to purchase this device. So we'll start off with the fact that it's both a solid note-taking as well as a reading device. You could make the argument actually that it's the jack of all trades, master of none. From a reading perspective, maybe a smaller device is a little bit more portable. From a note-taking perspective, maybe a larger device is best, like a 10-inch device, for example. But having said that, the 8.2-inch screen size is really good to do both of those activities, and this device does those both really well. Specifically, if you look at the writing itself, you feel very connected and it's very satisfying to write on the device. So they did an excellent job with that. In addition to that, the front lighting has warm and cold, and that's maybe less relevant for the note-taking, but it's more relevant for reading where you might be reading in darker environments. And having both warm and cold gets you the lighting more the way that you want it, as opposed to maybe just cold, for example. And then finally, the fact that you have Google Play access makes it much more broader utility in terms of reading. So all those things combined make it a really nice balance for anyone looking for a solid note-taking as well as a reading device. Going further, the display is really sharp and clear. It's a very crisp display. And it's not at 300 ppi, but it might as well be, and that's as high as the ink goes, and it certainly shows on this screen. It's very nice to look at. It's light and thin. Even with the case on, it's light and thin, but you take it out of the case, it's just a nice portable size. And then finally, and one of the major themes of this device are their implementation of what I'm calling creative ideas. And this is their star focus system, this is their to-do list system, and this is their outline system. I mean, you can argue that there's other manufacturers that maybe do bits of that, but their kind of unique take on these things I think is really something that would potentially draw someone's interest. Their to-do lists may be the best to-do list implementation that I've seen. The outline maybe not as good as, say, Supernote's header function, but still really good. And I think better than Books' in my opinion. And then the star focus system is really interesting, how they kind of connect it to time periods and what have you. So just a lot of creative ideas that I think, generally speaking, are quite well implemented. So if primary pros are reasons why you would purchase the device, then primary cons are reasons why you would pass on it. And first and foremost for this device has to be the price point. I've got some comps here. So this device with its cover comes in about $539. At least that's what it was when I purchased it recently on Amazon. You can buy really good 10-inch devices for that price or even less. So for example, the Viwoods AI paper, their 10.65 device, $549, it's just $10 more. The Note Air 4C, which comes with e-ink color, at $510, so it's cheaper. Even cheaper is the Go 10.3, which is currently listing at $410. So there's a lot of other options out there that are bigger and, at the same price point or less. This makes this an expensive device, relatively speaking. And I'm not even mentioning the two main competitors to this device, the Nomad or the Viwoods AI Paper Mini, which list below the price point of this device. So this, I think, by far and away, is the biggest con for this device and why you may not be interested in purchasing it. In addition to that, as we saw earlier in the video, the battery life on this device is not very good. It's one of the weaker battery life devices in its 7.8 to 8.2 inch class. It's not, I wouldn't call this as big of a negative as the price point is. You can use some of the battery saving features to work around it. For example, I've been using it at work the last few weeks, and I can almost get a full week out of the device, which is pretty much all I need, by using some of the auto sleep functions, as power saving function on the device. So you can kind of work around the battery limitations, but relative to other devices, it does show poorly. The navigation can be cumbersome, and I'll just give a couple examples of that. So if, for example, there's no home button really, there is a task manager button that kind of works like a home button. So in order to get to your home screen, you swipe up on the task manager and then clear it out by clicking on the X or anywhere on the screen. So it's two gestures, where other devices like the Viwoods Mini has just a home button. You just press it once. Same if you're in notebooks. When you're trying to get out of a notebook, you can click, there's like a check mark. You click first. I guess it's saving the note. I'm not quite sure. And then there's underneath the check mark appears an arrow, and you click that. So 2 clicks to get out of a note. Everybody else just does it in 1 click. So it's a little inefficient like that. Fortunately, there are ways around it, but some of the navigation is cumbersome, and those are some examples of that. The smart tools, as great as they are, and we mentioned those at the end of the pros list, it's important to note that they're very much OCR dependent. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use them if the OCR isn't working really well. You can use them, but they work best when it can recognize your handwriting. And so just to give you an example for myself, when I'm writing creatively, or I'm just kind of taking my time making a list or whatever, I'm on my own clock, I tend to kind of focus on my handwriting and I make it neater. That's what I just naturally do. And OCR can read that perfectly, or pretty close. But when I'm in meeting notes and I'm just furiously jotting things down, I'm on someone else's clock, then my writing, which is kind of small as it is virtually indecipherable by OCR. And that's where a lot of my notes personally are done. So I can use the smart tools. It's just that when I go to the to-do list, I will have no idea what I wrote. I have to go to the note. And you can get that via a link in the to-do list or into the star system. But it's just not as special as it is when the OCR can translate your writing properly. So just a con, the OCR functions are great and the smart features are great, but to really take advantage of them, you have to have handwriting that the OCR can translate. Otherwise, the advantage of those isn't quite as significant. So I list that as a major con. It will depend heavily on your own handwriting. Finally, the size just is not ideal for PDFs. And it's nothing germane to this device. Any device, in the 7.8 to 8.2 range, really, you can read PDFs on it. You can pinch and zoom, but it's just not an ideal experience. I would highly recommend, if your focus is PDFs, to look at a 10-inch or larger device. All right, so now we're going to go into the secondary pros of the device, and these are things that kind of stood out for me. I think they're worth calling out, but I wouldn't necessarily purchase the device because of these things. I just think they're kind of neat features that are worth highlighting. And we'll start off with the quick notes. Now, most devices have the ability to go into some version of quick notes, and the idea is that it's kind of a macro that allows you to get into a notebook or create a notebook quickly where you can just start writing almost in an instant, as opposed to going through a wizard, say, and picking your template, writing out your note name or what have you. But having said that, I personally find on other devices, I'd rather just go through that wizard. It doesn't take very long, and I've never utilized a quick note on a device. It's just nothing I've ever felt compelled or needed to do. On this device, I feel much differently about quick notes. It's a swipe on the lower bar of the screen, and this notepad comes up, and I just think it's a really excellent implementation of this concept, and it actually makes sense. I don't know if I'll end up actually ever using the quick notes, but I really like that it's there, and this is another great creative feature that they've added to this device, which I really appreciate. Next, ghosting is minimal. The device basically operates on what other device manufacturers would call an HD mode, and that does an excellent job of making sure the images look as good as they can, and also minimizing ghosting. There is some ghosting. You will need to reach for the refresh button every once in a while, but it's pretty rare, and the management of it is pretty solid. You can search on handwriting. You can search on handwriting within a notebook or across notebooks. If you do it across notebooks, you do need to have one of the iFlytek accounts. You need to be logged in for that to happen. But not all devices have search on handwriting, so it's nice to see that here. I think the UI is really well laid out, particularly for the screen size. And I guess I'm focusing here on the notes. The fact that they put, all the menu items on top, leaving the rest of the screen pretty much open, except for a couple notational items like page number on the bottom. It just makes a lot of sense for this size of device. It would not have made sense, as some companies do, by putting it on the side. And so it's nice to see them put that menu bar on top. The fact that you have universal pen selection, where you swipe down and bring down the drop-down menu, and then whatever pen style you select or whatever thickness you select will then be the pen that you'll use in any app on the device, reading and writing or what have you, is really cool. It's a nice feature to make sure if you like a pen style, you don't have to set it in each individual app. You can just do it in this one place, and it carries through whatever you do. And that takes us to our secondary cons, and these are things that I wish the device had done better, but I wouldn't necessarily say these are reasons to dissuade anyone from purchasing the device necessarily. Just negative things that I thought were worth calling out in the sense of completeness. And we'll just start off that the AI just isn't that well integrated in this device. It has the word AINOTE in the title, but Viwoods option is far superior, far better integrated. Yes, Viwoods has places where some of their set queries aren't that particularly useful, but their custom queries are amazing. And on this device, really all it is a chatbot interface and slight implementation of AI in the system itself. It's just, if you're looking for good AI integration, then this is not a great device. It has AI and quick access to that chatbot, but that's pretty much about it. I really wish it had a magnetic case where you can take the device out easier. The hook case works. There's nothing wrong with the hooks. It's just that when you're trying to remove the device, it's a lot more effort unsnapping it from those hooks than it would be with a magnetic case. And the reason why this is notable, at least for me, is when I'm using it as a reader, I would rather shed the case. I just want to hold the device. It's lighter that way. It's a little more comfortable to hold. So it's a small item, but it is still something I wish they had done better. There are some, what you might term missing note features, or note features that other competitors have that this device does not. And I'll give you not a comprehensive list, but a sense of what some of those major features are. First off, there's no layers on this device. Most devices will give you the option to have up to 5 different layers. And that's useful, particularly if you're doing a lot of drawing or illustrating. You can do different elements on different layers. Another thing that I use sometimes is I'll create kind of a poor man's template on one layer, and then I'll put a layer on top of it, which I'll actually write on, preserving what I created below. So there are reasons why you might want layers, but this device doesn't have them. It doesn't have an expandable canvas. Some devices allow you either to have an infinite canvas, or most devices actually allow you to have a 2x2 canvas. So what I'm saying is that the canvas is the screen that you're looking at, and other devices allow you to kind of move off the side one and down one, so you can kind of drag the note or zoom in and out on this much larger canvas, which is bigger than your screen size. On this device, you only get the screen size itself. The lasso feature doesn't have cut and copy. That's a feature that virtually everybody else has. So that's probably the most egregious omission, I would say, in terms of features. You can't really put any objects in notes, things like files or links. There's a small exception to that for the meeting. I believe you could put like pictures in the meeting notes, but in normal notes, there's nothing like that. And there's no shapes or line perfection features on this device as well. So that's just a handful of, I think, some of the more common features that other devices have that are missing on this device. Again, you do have that chatbot interface, but it's only through typing on the screen. There's no, even though there's microphones on the device, there's no microphone option that I could find to enter into the chatbot, which is a real big miss, because I would not use it unless I had voice input. And so I think that's a huge problem for using the chatbot interface. And I just don't list it as a major con, because I don't think people are going to be using the chatbot all that much anyway, so it's not a huge deal. But that's an odd miss on this device. The device, I wouldn't call it sluggish, but I wouldn't necessarily call it snappy either. And it can feel snappy at times, but there's other times where you'll do an action, like maybe you're bringing up the task manager, and there's kind of this beat until the task manager appears. And usually it happens when you do something like the first time. So if I bring up the task manager and I close it, I'll have to probably wait, a beat or two for that task manager to appear. But if I do it the second time, like I do it right away after having closed it, it'll come up a lot quicker. So, it's got little things like that. You get used to it. It's not a huge deal, but other devices are a little bit snappier. You have Google Calendar integration, which is great, but you don't have any other calendar integration. And I guess Outlook would probably be the best example of what's missing here. So just Google and not other calendars. And then the page turning slider is a neat idea, and this is one of those features. It sits between the chatbot switch and the quick note switch, is this page sliding indicator. The problem is that you try to get kind of in the zone of turning pages, but every once in a while it'll still register as if you're zipping ahead. So instead of going one page, it'll suddenly advance 3, what would seem like the same swipe. So it's not reliable, and I basically just ended up not using it. I kept trying to see if I could train myself to get it just right, and I would get it right most of the time, and then boom, I would zoom ahead 3 pages suddenly. It was never worth it. It's better just to use on-screen tapping navigation, which is reliable 100% of the time, than that page slider, which is unfortunate. It's kind of an interesting idea, but I think ultimately you won't be using it. Okay, so now that we've gone over the pros and cons, let's compare and contrast this device to the AI Paper Mini from Viwoods, which I think is its main competitor. And I guess what I would say is in favor of the iFlytek device, there are a couple things. First off, the fact that it has the warm and cold front lighting, as opposed to Viwoods, which just has the cold lighting, gives it just a little bit more utility. Not a lot, but just a little bit more as an e-reader. And the fact that the iFlytek has these really impressive features like the star focus system, or the to-do lists, or the outline, makes it in some ways a better note-taking device. So I could make the argument that the iFlytek is a better reader and writer than Viwoods, and that is the primary purpose of these devices. So you'd think then that the iFlytek might be the better device. The problem, I think, ultimately, is that the iFlytek doesn't necessarily distance itself all that much from the Viwoods. definitely think that the search functionality of the to-do lists, etc., those smart tools are really nice, and that's probably its most distinguishing feature for the iFlytek. But the reading really isn't that different. They both have Google Play access. But the Viwoods has the better, price point, the better battery life, the better AI integration. It just does a lot of other things a lot better across the board, such that I don't feel that the iFlytek ultimately does enough to compete with Viwoods. So I would have to say that between the two devices, the Viwoods AI Paper Mini is the better device, but there are some cases that can be made for the iFlytek. And particularly if you weren't price sensitive, if you didn't mind paying extra, then some of those search and reference features that the iFlytek has might be worth it. But you have to have a very focused use case that would leverage those things in order to justify the higher price point for the iFlytek device. So that's kind of how I think those two stack up. I kind of dismiss the competition between the Nomad and the iFlytek because I felt like the Nomad, or I do feel that the Nomad is a little more writing based, even though you could sideload apps, whereas the iFlytek is much more of a balanced reading and writing device. But with those smart tools, you can make some argument that maybe the iFlytek competes against the Nomad as well. So similar things. I would say that the Nomad, for its various strengths, is the better overall device. But if you have a focused use case, then there might be a reason why you would consider the iFlytek Mini, or rather the 8.2-inch AINOTE instead. So given all that, where do I finally land on this device? Can I recommend it or not? And I'm going to say a couple of things which are a little bit contradictory. I think generally speaking, I'm not going to be recommending this device. And again, it's the price point is the most compelling reason against it. There are just too many other devices out there that are better overall that you can get for the same price or cheaper. I mean, I think that's just pretty straightforward. And I don't think the iFlytek does enough, as kind of cool as it is in some places, to justify that kind of gap in price. But having said that, I really liked this device. I enjoyed reviewing it, I enjoyed using it, and there's a lot of positive things to say about it. So if someone had a use case where, those smart tools were going to align perfectly with what they were trying to do with the device, I would still take a look at this device. I think it's worth checking out, and I would encourage you to go to my visual tour. And I know it's a long video, but there's chapters. Just go to the areas of interest to you, and it's worth considering, particularly if you're not price sensitive. If the extra money is not a concern for you, then it might be worth it. I mean, there's a lot to like here. I just think that some of the innovation on this device is really impressive. We talked quite a bit already about the smart tools, whether it's the star focus, the to-do list, the outlines. All those are really well done, particularly, if you have handwriting that translates well with OCR, then those are great tools, competitive and maybe even better than what any of the other competitors out there are offering. So that's the kind of the highlight, I guess, of my list. But I would go on further. The fact they have the quick notes is the best implementation of quick notes I've ever seen. I think it's really cool. And even though I don't think there's a lot of utility in this, that their chronology of activities is kind of a cool, neat little function. There's just a lot of great ideas in this device. I think it's worth checking out. I just can't recommend it. But if you find that what this device does and your use case align really well, not so concerned about the price, yeah, I would encourage you then to potentially check it out and maybe even purchase it. But overall, I can't recommend it relative to what other competitors are offering. So I wanted to offer a few suggestions for how the device could be better, in the hopes that maybe on the off chance someone from iFlytek might be viewing this video. And obviously the biggest thing, of course, is the price. If you lower the price point, it completely changes the dynamic of whether I recommend this device or not. But putting that aside, 3 things in terms of the software that I think are worth considering and would make a significant impact. The first is if you could improve the OCR function. Now again, I'm not saying the OCR on the device is bad. It seems fine, but in a lot of my notes that I can see and know what I'm writing, it doesn't always translate those. So if it had improved that, it would just be more valuable to more people as a result, as opposed to just people with good handwriting. That might be asking a bit much, but I had to throw that out there. The other thing I would recommend is that there's be a transparent screensaver, because that's a way of saving battery life. So a lot of times I'll have my device on my desk, for example, and I'll have maybe an agenda, to-do list for the day. I'm not necessarily writing. I can go into sleep mode and still see that list, thus saving battery life but not losing any utility as a result. I think especially given the poor battery showing, that would be a really useful feature for this device to have. The last thing I would say is that, as I mentioned, that slider, the page slider, it's a really novel idea, but ultimately it just didn't work for me and I couldn't use it. And some of the navigation on the device is a little bit clunky. So I thought, to solve both problems with just one change that slider, or at least have the option to change that slider from a page turner to a shortcut bar where you can set customizable shortcuts. So maybe you swipe and then a box comes up and then you can click on your shortcuts. So you're always 2 gestures away from whatever you want to get to. I think for this device, that would add a lot of value to it, a lot of utility, and would be a special feature that most other devices don't have. So those would be some recommendations I would throw out there that might add some value to the device, which is already a really good device, but it would make it even better. Okay, so I'm going to close out by talking a little bit about the upcoming device from iFlytek, which, as far as I can tell, they've named identical to this device that I'm reviewing in this series, which is the AINOTE Air 2. This device that I reviewed, which was released last year, was an 8.2-inch screen device. The device coming up is a 10.65-inch device. So if you had interest in this device but just wished it had a bigger screen size, that's actually coming. Now, I don't know all the details about it. I've seen some of the marketing materials for this device, but there's some question marks. I don't know. For example, I don't think that the larger device is going to have front lighting. So that might be one difference between that and this device that we've reviewed in this series. I'm not sure if it has a document scanner, so I haven't seen any mention of it. So I'm kind of assuming maybe not. So there's some things to be aware of there. And the reason why I'm mentioning all that is that there is this they're going to do a Kickstarter campaign where they're using Kickstarter not to raise funds to develop the device, but just as a marketing tool. And we see this all the time. So it's just a way of getting, the device out there into the public and garnering interest. It doesn't mean that the device will never make it to market, as is the case sometimes with Kickstarter campaigns. Well, they're actually doing a pre-Kickstarter campaign where they're offering the device at $469. Again, you don't know the details of it, but basically what it is you put in $5 deposit and then you can purchase the device later at that price. I'm assuming that that's the device and the stylus and not the cover. And the cover is probably $50. They have a contest going on where you can fill out this survey and they're saying we'll give you a cover for free and it's $50. So that's where I'm getting that number from. So take the $469 plus $50. So you're talking about around $520 roughly for this 10-inch device. And that's a pretty good deal. So I'm just throwing that out there because I don't know how long the offer will be out, and I don't know what the eventual sale price of the device will be. They're implying it's going to be $650, which, if true, would be way too expensive. So I'm just throwing this out there as a courtesy, and I'll put this in the description, the link where you can go in and reserve the device at that price if you're interested. But again, with the caveat of we're not 100% sure what of all the specifications of the device. We know it'll be light. It's promising to be under 300 grams, which is amazing for that size. We know it'll have pretty much the same software that we've seen in the visual tour on this 8.2-inch device, but some of the other details we don't know, like probably not front lighting. We don't know what the battery life will be like on this device at all. A lot of unknowns. And to be clear, I'm not getting any type of cut by putting this in. This is just a courtesy. So I'm just sharing this with you and you can do whatever you want. But it strikes me that if you were interested in the 10-inch device, If you liked what you saw here, but you want something bigger, then it might be worth getting a reservation at that lower price point, because that is a reasonable price point in my mind for a 10-inch device, not the 650, which is what they're implying it will be, although they're kind of mushy about that in different communication channels, so I won't go into it. But anyway, I'm just throwing that out there, and that will be in the description below. Regardless, I did put in a reservation, and I will receive the device at some point, and then I'll do my review series on that device as well. So if you want to wait for that, that will be coming up, whenever they release it. I think the Kickstarter campaign will formally start in September, I believe. And then who knows when they'll actually start releasing devices, presumably this fall. But we'll see. Whenever it comes out is when I'll do my review. So anyway, just wanted to share that. Again, no affiliation. I have no business relationship with iFlytek. I just wanted to put that out there. If you have any questions or comments about the review series on this device, the 8.2 inch, let me know. Pop those in the comments. I'll try to answer things the best that I can. And hope you enjoyed the series. I've got a lot more review series coming up over the next few months. I expect Viwoods to release a new device. I expect Books to release a new device. I expect Penstar to release a new device. And I will hope to review all of those. So it should be a fun next few months as we get into kind of the holiday season. So I look forward to seeing you there. Please like and subscribe. Until then, I'll see you next time.